My name is Harrison, I have 2 cats, and if you're feeling scared about what's happening in America today, I want you to know that's a good thing, because fear and excitement are very closely related. So in this video, I'm going to try to show you how you can shift your perspective on what's happening in America so you can change your fear into excitement, because I think this is a very exciting phase of American history. Now, on a physiological level, the body responds almost exactly the same way to both fear and excitement. Your heart rate increases, your breathing speeds up, and your muscles tense. The best example I've had in my life of this dual experience comes from skydiving. Have you ever been skydiving? I did the first 4 jumps of my accelerated freefall course when I was going through a midlife crisis. Well, not a midlife crisis, more of a quarter-life crisis. It happened in my 20s. Whatever you would call it when you're breaking up with someone you've been dating for 2 years and you stop talking to all your friends and you move to a city where you don't know anyone and you're done with college but you have no idea what you want to do with your life, that's when I decided it was a good idea to jump out of an airplane. And if you haven't done it, let me tell you, there's nothing quite like hanging half of your body out of an airplane 10,000 feet above the ground. Even though I felt relatively safe with my parachute and the 2 instructors on either side, it was still terrifying. And ultimately, I decided that the ratio of fear to excitement was a little bit too much on the fear side, but it was, without a doubt, the most exciting thing I've ever done. And so I think that with just a little change in the way you think about what's happening in America, you can turn that ratio from one that's tilted heavily towards fear and uncertainty to one that's tilted towards excitement and uncertainty. Because there is a lot of uncertainty right now. There's nothing I can do about that. But I think that within that uncertainty lies opportunity. And I think that's very exciting. But I can completely understand how it could also be scary. Because just like in skydiving, this moment in American history, it feels like we are free falling into the future. All of these institutions that we used to think were solid, we're actually finding out are paper thin as Donald goes barreling through every part of our society. So the part of American history where Americans have relied on Congress to keep the president in check is over. Those branches are completely aligned. Now, the founders of this nation also created an equal judiciary branch to keep a check on the other 2, but that has also been completely captured by the right. So I agree with you. If you feel like there's nothing slowing us down from plummeting into this dark hole that is the future, and there really aren't even any rules in our system that you can grab onto to make yourself feel safe. Something like the 22nd Amendment that says the president can only serve 2 terms. Something tells me that we're going to find out in 2028 that that isn't real either. And so we're really in this situation where everything is falling together, side by side. All of the political, economic, and social ideas that were governing our society are going away. And as far as I can tell, the only thing we can rely on consistently is that things are going to keep changing. We are in totally uncharted territory now. You can no longer look at the past to predict the future. No one knows what the future looks like. It could be anything. Now, bear with me because I have a little bit more bad news to pile on. I think this political crisis is also converging with a personal crisis that's been emerging in Americans' lives for a long time now, where the models for living that people have relied on to give them direction are failing. When I turned 18, the model was go to college, party, date, find a long-term girlfriend or boyfriend, graduate college, get married, go into a career, have a couple kids, raise those kids, work at your job until you're retired, and pass the model down so the next generation can repeat the pattern. I clearly remember being 18 years old and thinking that I was going to go to college for a few years, and then by 25, I'd be married and have a few kids. And when I thought about that, I felt secure. There was no mystery in my life. There was nothing to figure out. And I definitely found comfort in that. And so you can imagine how much of a shock it was to me when I actually turned 25 and none of that happened. Instead, I was just getting out of the Marine Corps and I didn't have a girlfriend or a wife or kids. And suddenly I realized none of that was gonna happen. And even more, I didn't want it to happen. I still felt so young. I didn't want to get married. I didn't want to have kids. I felt like I was just getting started in life. And that's when I realized this model for living that I'd been given in childhood had failed. And so, as life tends to do, I went on a little journey that I never could have predicted beforehand. There was no model for the life that I actually ended up living. It wasn't like building a house where you start with a blueprint and you know exactly what goes where and when to do it, and it's all planned out ahead of time. It's been a lot more like a tree growing in a forest. My life unfolded out of me. I created it at the same time that I was living it. And it's been a really beautiful process. But the price I paid for not living according to a model was extreme uncertainty on a regular basis. And I'll make a video going into all the specifics of my journey. It's probably going to be a series of videos because I want you to know about it. But I'll just sum it up by saying that I never could have chosen to live the life that I actually lived. But I'm so grateful to have had the experiences that I've had. And I wouldn't go back and change any of it because it's made me the person that I am today, which gives me a unique perspective on what's happening in America right now, which I think is exactly the perspective that people need. Now, how could I have planned that 13 years ago I'd go off the beaten path into the unknown to break with the model that my society had given me for living, which was exactly the right thing to do because at some point in the future, that very same society that had given me that model that I'd failed to follow would be changing, and it would need the knowledge that I'd found out there wandering around in the darkness of my life. And so this is a very special moment for me because there were so many nights when I laid in bed wondering how my journey was going to end, or if I was even on a journey, or was I going to have to accept someday that I f***ed up and I was just wasting my life, and at some point I'd have to go get a job at Amazon. And there were times when it was really hard to keep going because so much of the journey had to be done alone. Remember that crisis that I went through in my late 20s that I mentioned earlier? A part of that was a long, drawn-out breakup. And in that process, I very clearly heard a voice in my head say, "Something is wrong with you." At the time, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't think there was anything wrong with me, and so I ignored it. And so a couple of years later, I got into another relationship which had a really bad breakup, and once again, I heard a voice say, "Something is wrong with you." So this time I listened, and I decided not to date again until I understood what that meant. That was 10 years ago, basically my entire 30s. That means 10 years without a date, 10 years without a kiss, 10 years without holding hands or hugging or sex, 10 years without any intimacy with a woman. I turn 40 next month, and according to that old model of living, this was the prime of my life, and I gave it up. That was the price I paid to answer the question of what was wrong with me. The good news is I figured it out, and the answer I found is what I bring you now. It's the thing that's going to change your perspective on what's happening in America. And my hope is that it transforms your fear into excitement. And so what I discovered was the reason I had these really difficult relationships in my 20s that were full of yelling and fighting and lying and jealousy and just being so angry all the time was because that was the relationship that my parents had had when I was a kid. This was the big revelation that changed my life. And this is the confrontation that we're hurtling towards now. It's the fact that the lives we live as adults are determined by the experiences that we have in childhood. And I had closed myself off emotionally a long time ago in response to the dysfunctional environment I'd been raised in. And when I realized this, I thought, holy shit, that must be true for everybody. Why would I be unique in any way? Of course, we don't all have the exact same experiences, but I've met men and women my entire life that are carrying some kind of weight from childhood. And then it dawned on me. That's the one thing that connects us. The one thing that runs deeper than our skin color or our religion or the amount of money we have is the fact that at one point, a long time ago, we were children that needed help from the adults in our lives. And a lot of us didn't get that help. A lot of us got left behind or ignored or abused by the very people that we were utterly dependent on for survival. The people that were keeping us alive, feeding us, clothing us, housing us, were also beating us, mocking us, and sexually abusing us. So my journey had started with the thought, something is wrong with me. But it ended with the realization that there was something wrong with all of us. And that thing is that we're coming out of childhood with these scars and this pain because the models we're using for parenting are abusive. They've always been abusive. This revelation is the source of my excitement because for the first time in human history, we could do something about it. We had the language to talk about it and the technology to communicate about it and the tools to organize against it. So what does this have to do with politics? It has everything to do with politics. The Democratic Party is lying in ruins right now because it refused to listen to the pain that the working class was feeling. And now I, a member of the working class, am gonna take over using the only message that's powerful enough to put it back together again, but I'm not gonna reassemble the old Democratic Party. The old Democratic Party is dead, and the new Democratic Party has gotta be born of this new idea. This has got to be the focus of our society, because the effects of intergenerational abuse are the source of huge amounts of suffering in our society. You want to solve school shootings or mass shootings or drug addiction? You've got to change the conditions under which people are being raised. You want to beat Donald Trump and the Republicans? You've got to understand the childhood experiences of the people drawn to that movement. You want to know why so many Americans don't vote and are apathetic about what their government does? Ask them about their childhood. The phase of our lives known as childhood has got to be the focus of our society going forward. Nothing else is half as powerful in its potential to unite this country. The fact that a long time ago we had to split off parts of ourselves in order to adapt to these dysfunctional family systems is a universal experience, and it's time to start putting people back together again. This is the only thing that people that are running our society should be talking about. We should be talking about how to use the immense power of the United States government to point directly at childhood, because that is where every single problem in our society begins. In The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk says that intergenerational trauma is a hidden epidemic because of how much damage it does to us and we don't even know about it. Now just imagine that something like COVID-19 existed, except instead of transmitting it from person to person through the air by our breathing, it's transferred through our actions by how we treat one another. And instead of the symptoms being shortness of breath or low oxygen levels, they're drug addiction, domestic violence, workaholism, or just jealousy and insecurity. I was an extremely insecure man in my 20s. I would get jealous over anything. But back then, I didn't have the language to understand what I was feeling, much less communicate it to my girlfriend. And I just had no way of knowing that my feelings of inadequacy actually came from a deep core belief that I was unlovable because my mom didn't hold me enough as a baby or something like that. I couldn't have known that the way I was feeling today had nothing to do with today, and instead was connected to some early life experiences from 20 or 30 years ago. And in a very basic way, that's the source of many Americans' feelings of anxiety and depression. Before I did this inner work, I couldn't even make eye contact with a stranger without my heart jumping into my throat and my entire body tensing up. And forget about flirting with an attractive woman. It took a long time for me to understand that I was experiencing a fight or flight response that had been established in childhood. Because when I made eye contact with my parents as a kid, it usually didn't end well because they were very angry people. And what a child learns growing up in an angry environment, surrounded by these giants that are just raging at one another, is that the way to survive is to be small. Don't make eye contact. Don't attract attention, or that anger's coming for you. Now, my parents ended up divorcing when I was 8, but as every child of a broken home knows, everything isn't just fine and then your parents split up. The divorce is the end result of years of screaming and cursing, slamming doors, absenteeism. Mom or dad just isn't there. Maybe they're working all the time, or they're alcoholics, so they're there, but they're drunk, or they're giving each other the silent treatment. So even though they're not fighting, there's this tension in the air that those babies are just soaking up all the time, and it's changing them. It changed me, and it took me a long time for me to turn my gaze back to those early days. But that was the only way I was able to change myself back into who I really was. And you can change. Now we know how. First, we've got to become aware that this sickness has infected our society, passing from parent to child in childhood. Second, we've got to do the work to cure it. What did we do as soon as COVID emerged and started killing people? We went to work on a vaccine. People started masking. Some people started taking horse dewormer. I'm not judging. My point is, we started fighting against the disease. We have to do the same thing here. We have to fight. And there are ways we can use the power of the government, which is really the power of us. We are the government in the American system. We the people. There are ways we can use the power of the government to start the hard work of curing this intergenerational disease that affects every single American. There's nothing you can do to reduce the school shootings in America without talking about the dysfunctional family systems that people are being raised in. You can't cure addiction without talking about the conditions in childhood that create addicts. You can't solve the obesity epidemic with just Ozempic. We have to talk about the fact that 1 in 4 women experience some kind of sexual abuse before the age of 18, and a lot of women use food to cover up up the shame they feel in their bodies from those experiences. School shootings, mass shootings, corrupt politicians, anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, sexual difficulties, marital difficulties, divorce, alcoholism, drug addiction, all addictions, overspending, workaholism, obesity, and all forms of compulsive behavior have their roots in the individual's childhood. And I don't think it's a coincidence that people like Elon Musk and Donald Trump are in charge of our society at this moment in American history. It's public knowledge that they both had extremely abusive fathers. I'll be examining both of their childhoods in future videos so we can better understand the kind of people that are created by child abuse. Now, I want to wrap up this video by saying that even though the Republicans are dominating the news cycle right now, this moment is not about Donald or Elon or any of the stupid shit that they're doing. Beyond the fact that Donald and Elon are symbolic of a larger problem in our society, this moment is about you and me and every single one of us going back to a time in our lives that was very painful. I didn't think about my childhood for 20 years after I became an adult. I thought that I could just leave it in the past, but I was wrong. I didn't think of the past as something that I was carrying inside of me even at this very moment. And this isn't about blame. I'm not blaming my parents for how they raised me. They didn't know how to do better. They didn't have the info that we have now. This is about responsibility, giving them back their responsibility for failing to raise me in an emotionally healthy environment, and me taking responsibility for living my own life. I want to live my life. I don't want to be just unconsciously repeating the past. What happened happened. You can't change that. What you can change is the way you feel about it now, so you can free your body from the survival mode that it's stuck in. This is the future of American politics. If anything I've said in this video applies to you, or if you just want to learn more, be sure to join my Discord server. You can find the link for that down in the description below, along with the links for all of my socials. Now, I am shaving this beard at 100,000 subscribers, so be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons and tell your friends and family and co-workers and strangers about this channel. I'm building a movement for all of us based on the one thing that connects all of us, the child that we once were that still exists somewhere inside of us. I will see y'all next time. Take care, be safe, and never forget what I always say.